one of the more obvious parts of what gets in the way of spirit is our judgments. And I find that often perceptions find all kinds of ways of masquerading as judgments. Or I should say, judgments find all kinds of ways of masquerading as perceptions. So that when we look at people, we decide to pay attention to whatever gets our attention. And that may not really be what's present. Now, if we were really seeing the Spirit, what would we be seeing here tonight? What would we be experiencing? Obviously, if this is a first opportunity for some of you to look at what is the movement of spiritual inner awareness, then you're going to be coming in with, well, what is it I'm going to be seeing or hearing or experiencing in some way that will let me know this is the Spirit that I'm aware of. This is the Spirit's presence. Well, I'm going to tell you some of the signs that I know are the Spirit's presence. It comes forward as joy, comes forward as peace, it comes forward as truth. Most likely, if you think of joy, peace, and truth, whatever ideas you have about that, typically people are going to have favorable perceptions. Like that would be something that matches with your idea of the Spirit's presence. But it's simply an idea. Now, obviously, I could just say those words. They don't have any real meaning. I don't have any real, let's say, authority to utter them. You might say, well, even though you say joy, peace, and truth, I don't really perceive you as joy, peace, and truth. I perceive you as something less than joy, peace, and truth. Now, a question would enter, is that your perception that's being projected over here in some way and being reflected back to you, or is it accurate that you're just seeing that? Well, I would have to say it's going to be on both parts of that as a minimum, that the projection is going to come forward that is less than truth, less than peace or joy, and also I'm going to reflect that to you. And I simply look at that as we as human beings don't measure up to the perfection of Spirit. I would say that's a given. Now, if there is somebody here that claims and knows yourself as the perfection of Spirit, I really would like to give this place to you so that I can sit here in your presence and in any way have a greater experience of what that is. I don't know anybody who's showed up in the flesh at this point that is perfection in the Spirit. I've seen people who have the perfection of Spirit present, and I recognize that it is in my power to shift my awareness so that I'm more aware of that perfection. And that really is the movement of spiritual inner awareness, the shifting, the moving of awareness into the Spirit. And it tells us that there's always an opportunity to do that. So if you want to know, well, what is the movement of spiritual inner awareness? It is choosing and taking the opportunity that is here to move more into the Spirit. There's a question there. Why would we do that? Does it really make any difference? And the obvious answer is yes, or why would we have an organization, a focus of the movement of spiritual inner awareness if it didn't make a difference? And I'd have to say, well, we're doing that because it does and because we can. That's also an important requisite, that we have the ability to have greater spiritual awareness. I would have to say that when I consider whatever we're doing, each of us, that it's valuable. How valuable? In terms of each one of us, most valuable. That means that each of us have the full power and the full ability to do this. And also that we have what would be that full power and ability given to us. Or the ability is there, the way is there to make this happen. Enter something from me personally. I find that if I don't find a way to relate it to you in a personal way, then it just after a while becomes so much words and so many ideas, and there's not really much to relate to. So recently I was over on another island, Maui, and we decided to come over here for a number of reasons, and among them was just to enjoy what you find in the islands and to have some recreation and relaxation, R&R. So one of those things that I've been doing lately is playing golf. So I had the opportunity to go out and play some golf. And my playing golf has kind of gone in two phases. There was the early phase when I was given a set of golf clubs, probably when I was 17 or 18 for Christmas. And then I played off and on for about 3 or 4 years. And then there's the later phase when I was given a set of golf clubs a year ago last Christmas. And since that time, I've been starting to play again. Now, what I've been finding is that how I used to play and how I've been playing recently are very different. And the difference is humbling. Now, you probably have some idea of what I'm talking about. And what it really means is that my relationship to golf previously was something better in my mind than it is now. Meaning I have some reference point. Now, I don't even know at this point whether it's real or not. I have an idea that my scores used to be lower, and I think most of you realize that in golf, if you have a lower score, that means you're playing better. That means you take less strokes to go around the course. And so my memory is telling me that I'm taking more strokes these days than I used to. Now, there's another reference point I have that to really get full value while I'm playing golf, the more strokes I take, the more value I'm actually getting. The more strokes in a game, I'm actually getting more value there by kind of getting more for my money, in a sense, or more for the time that I'm out there. Now, I would say that's some kind of folly about it, and it helps lift the disturbance that I have about not playing as well as I would like to. So I'm using this as a metaphor for a variety of things, that if we're playing the cello, if we're having relationships, if we're doing a job, if we're achieving things in life, that it's a relationship with ourselves in how we're doing. And there's a reference point inside that we bring forward, and that reference point serves to tell us, are we doing well, or are we doing not so well, good or bad, right or wrong, those kinds of reference points. I find that there's always a reference point in spirit, and that is spirit. Now, I mentioned earlier that some of the ways I relate to spirit are joy, peace, and truth. But I also relate to spirit as difficulty, agony, upset. Now, how does I manage to relate to spirit in that way? Well, it's just part of my experience. And part of my experience is that the spirit we're relating to doesn't go away. It stays present. And it's the idea of like richer and poorer, and sickness and health, till birth or death does us together. It's a little different reference point, but it kind of says something about the spirit, that it doesn't really go away, and it's always with us. So it was with us in the beginning, and it's with us in the end. And what that all adds up to is that there is really no beginning and there's no end, because there's something eternal about the spirit. And when we come into that relationship, there's something eternal about us. Now, the other day on the golf course, I think it was about hole number 14, something like that. And if you're familiar with golf, there's typically 18 holes. So 14's getting to be towards the end. I think it was around that point that I was on the tee. And so when you hit the ball off the tee, if you hit it with the biggest club you got, they call it the driver, then that's a drive. And the object is to drive the ball with direction. So you're driving it at the hole. That's the objective. And then part of the drive is to drive it as close to the hole as you can. If you can, just drive the ball right into the hole, like a hole-in-one. And so that's what you go for. And I hit the ball on number 14 extremely straight and extremely far by my reference point, whatever one I was carrying. And I turned to one of the people that I was playing with and I said, you know, I just realized something, that I'm going to come out for another game of golf just so I might hit another ball like that one. And that I'm willing to have hit all the other balls I hit today that were frustrating and agonizing and disturbing and by some reference point, not good enough. And I really find that in the movement of spiritual inner awareness, we're driving towards a hole-in-one. And maybe it's on a par 5. So it's actually like we're driving towards something that maybe has never been done before. Like I've never heard of somebody who got a hole-in-one on a par 5 golf course. Not on anything that was legitimate, like 500 yards or longer, something like that. I never heard of somebody hitting a 500-yard drive and then it went in the hole. And yet I look at what we're doing here in the movement of spiritual inner awareness kind of on the order of that. So you might be thinking, are you saying it's next to impossible? And I'd say it's next to impossible. And then we have this factor called God that somehow orders things so that all things are possible. And that's the order of God that this movement of spiritual inner awareness is directed towards. That we're driving towards an order of perfection. And we do things physically to line up with it. So if you'll excuse my metaphor here around golf, I mean, when you get up to hit the ball, there's an addressing of it. And in the addressing of it, there's taking in consideration, where the hole is and what the lie is, and the lie is how the ball sits wherever you find it, whether it's on a tee or on the fairway or in the rough. And then that determines how you address it. And there's closed stances, and there's open stances, and there's straight stances. I don't know if that's the correct term. But you change the way you stand so that your feet are positioned differently. They can be narrower, they can be wider. You pick up different clubs. The clubs are shorter, they're longer. The ones that are shorter are for shorter distance. The ones that are longer are for longer distance. The ones that are shorter tend to be easier to handle so that you can get more accurate shots. The ones that are longer tend to be more difficult to handle, so it's more likely that the shots are less accurate. And all of that lines up into an approach we take in the movement of spiritual inner awareness, so that you take in consideration where you lie, where you are. And all of us bring forward an individual circumstance that we're dealing with. And the Spirit addresses this in our individuality with perfection. What I mean by that is wherever you lie, wherever we find you, whether you have a 1-foot putt to the hole or you're 500 yards away on the tee, that the perfection of the Spirit addresses you that you can do it in one stroke. And what we look at that is we can do it in this lifetime. And we call that soul transcendence. Sometimes you just have to deal with what's present in a way that takes you off of what you're doing. It might be called an accident. It might be called a disaster, the unexpected, the unwanted. Most likely you can fill in the blanks, that even those were general terms that you would relate to in your life, that you've had circumstances that were unwanted, unexpected, disasters, in your own interpretation. And then the question is, was that something that was a sign that my life was off, it wasn't working, I was being punished? Or were those signs that the Spirit is working with me in my addressing the perfection that's present here and available? What I would tell you is that that process with the Spirit is always addressing the perfection, always making it available to you from the place that you're found. There's a practical approach in the Spirit. So that if you decided you were going to come here tonight and you wanted a hole-in-one from the par 5, in other words, I want to see God now. I want to feel the totality of God now. I want to realize all of what God is now here, or this movement of spiritual inner awareness is just a bunch of junk. Well, you could take that approach. And because you make the demand on the Spirit that's present, that I want it all now, you just might get it. So I'm not saying don't do that. But our approach is much more of a practical spirituality, so that we might look at where we are and we say, hey, we're 500 yards away. So rather than to really just go after it and hit it with all your might, so you come out of your shoes and you know your body goes down the course. You know, my experience with trying to do that is I usually miss completely, or that's the feeling I have. And what I mean is I do it and the ball's still sitting on the tee, or it's still sitting where it was when I went after it with all my might. And yet, if I was really going to go for it in the totality of it, I'd say do that. So there is an approach that we're taking here of going after God with all our might, with all you got. On the course that I'm on, and most of them that I've played on, they use sprinkler heads to do yardage markers, so that as you're going along on the fairway or wherever you are, and you wonder how far am I from the pin, the hole, if you look around, they're usually within about 15 or 20 yards is a sprinkler head, and it'll have the yardage on there, like 140 or 180 or whatever it is. Yesterday, there was one that said, just hit it with all you got. This is true. Just hit it with all you got. And then what? You know, the obvious meaning was you're so far away that if you think you're going to reach the green, go for it. Just go ahead and let it rip. And then on another level, it was just saying you're not going to reach the green, so why don't you play up toward the green on a practical side. So we do both approaches, where we're constantly going after accuracy, we're going after a direct approach, which means, typically speaking, we're going to go at it as best we can. And we talk a lot about things that are distractions, like what's in the rough. And what's in the rough is greater difficulty. I think that's pretty obvious, right? And when you get off course, then you run into the obstacles. Like in a golf course, it's trees or it's water or it's very high grass or whatever. I mean, on some of the islands, it's a volcanic rock. It's just whatever would be difficult to work with. And then, of course, if you're in the fairway, it's usually low-cut grass, so the ball typically will be set up as best it can. And then they have like a partial rough that's on the sides, and then they have typically the rough. And these are signs and signals when we're on course, when we're direct with the Spirit. It does tend to be more in the area of peaceful, joyful, truthful, loving, caring, sharing, health, wealth, and happiness. These are qualities that are in line with a direct approach. But what often people do with the approach is when they get into difficulty is they get upset and disturbed. Like there are tales of golfers. I haven't done this, but throwing their clubs. I even had somebody tell me that one golfer got so upset, not only they threw their clubs, but they threw the caddy in the water. The person that comes along to help them. Not necessarily recommended approach. Typically, when the going gets rough, the rough really gets going. Meaning the rough about us, the difficulty, the harshness, the disturbance, the negativity gets going. And it really is not the time to get rough with the rough. It's like that. It's like take an approach of, just hitting it with anger. That's not the approach to go after it, unless it can be used. We talked earlier, one of our guidelines is use everything to your advantage, even anger. And that's an approach that we take in the movement of spiritual inner awareness, is that everything about you, every circumstance, every situation in your life can be used to direct yourself into spirit as energy, so that you can use the anger as power, the power of intention. One of the practical things I remember John Roger talking about early on about how to use anger was you can use it as an excellent way to clean house. So that if you have to scrub a floor, you can really scrub it, or clean windows. But it's not a good time to drive a car, typically. And generally speaking, it's not a good time to talk to somebody you really love and care about. I'm sure it's not a good time to talk to somebody you don't love and care about, and who doesn't love and care about you, because it tends to escalate whatever is the friction or the conflict. It's a really great time to talk to God. That's a direct approach in the movement of spiritual inner awareness, is to talk to God. That means, like linguistically, it also means perceptually, so that the relationship is one of communion. In whatever language you find God is speaking or understanding. Now, I have found there is a universal language, and the movement of spiritual inner awareness teaches this universal language as a way to talk to God. So here it is. Love. Loving. I would bet you've heard this before. So if you were looking for something new, profound, like the revelation to kind of split open the roof, or maybe the roof of your head and open you up, then I would say loving. And if you're not experiencing that, if you're saying, well, I've already heard that, or I already know that, then I would tend to tell you, no, you don't. Because the revelation of love is completely transcending and transformational. So if there is one directive, if there's one approach that we always take when we're playing the course, going to God, it is to love. So that's every stroke, every step along the way, whatever the score is, wherever we are, it's always to love. And if somehow you come to find that that's not what you perceive here or in the way that we represent the movement of spiritual inner awareness, then we are being misrepresented. Either in the way that you're seeing us is a misrepresentation, or we're somehow misrepresenting what we are to you. If you're just meeting us, let me go ahead and apologize now up front for misrepresenting the loving and the truth and the joy that is the movement of spiritual inner awareness. And let me direct you to the true source of that. That source is inside. It is only secondarily outside. That means, at best, outside of yourself, it is a reflection. I hope, I wish, I pray for you that it's a clear, beautiful reflection, so that you're constantly having the love of who you are, the beauty of who you are reflected to you in your life. That, to me, is also one of the signs of the Spirit, is there's a majesty, a grace, a beauty that is constant, even in the most disturbing, awful, terrible circumstances. None of us have to wander too long to realize that those circumstances are in the world, and they portray themselves in pain, in conflict, war, the violence, those types of things. And if you stop short in that reflection, then you're going to be halting the movement of spiritual inner awareness. Can you stop it? No. That's a revelation. If you think about it, there are people that think they can stop it. Well, I'll just die. You ever had that feeling? I'm just going to die. Or I'm going to kill myself. I'll show you. Something like that. Or maybe the talk goes up to God. I'll die, and that'll get you. I'll go somewhere where you can't find me. Now you're just going somewhere where you're going to be found more. And that's an obvious process, that all of us in the movement of spiritual inner awareness are going to make a transition called death. And when we look at it as an event that is upcoming, we also look past it. How do we do that? We have to look past this world. That's part of what brings you here, is the knowing that you are more than what you find in this world. You're more than the body, the personality, the history that you carry. Something inside of you, whether it's a direct knowing, so you know very consciously what it is beyond this life and beyond this world, that you've had those experiences. And we do have the experiences. We have them constantly if we're paying attention. Some of them are more profound, more easily perceived than others when we know the Spirit and we know that presence. If we consider that we are going past this world, that this is not our stopping point, then we're also considering the movement of spiritual inner awareness. That it does go on past death, that there is life after this world, or life after life, however it's termed. And what are we doing towards that? Are we directing ourselves in the short term, which is really to live in terms of the world? That's the short term. The long term is to live in terms of God. And where does that go? It goes into love. It goes into the Spirit. We also worship in the Spirit. And when I say also, I'm making a reference to other scripture. And to be real specific, if you need it, it's in the Bible. That we worship in spirit. That's where we place it. And where do we find the Spirit? The source of it is in our life, which is inside. If you were to consider the source of your life and to see it out here, then it would say, well, when your life ends, when there's this thing called death, then this ends too. But if you see it as an inner source, an inner process, then it's the opportunity to allow that presence to come more awake. When we do the worship, we take time to go inside. That's part of the movement of spiritual inner awareness, is there is a dedication, and we make it daily. And when we make it daily, we make it all day, daily. We learn and we practice how to walk in the Spirit, how to breathe in the Spirit. So there is no moment when we are disconnected. The truth is, there is no moment when we are disconnected. So what we're doing is transferring our awareness to the connection that the Spirit is always present. We look to a consciousness. First, that consciousness is with us. It's here now. And since I've been talking, there's been a transition going on, very much so in the last 5 minutes or so. So that more and more you're being pulled inside. It's being more difficult to stay focused up here. And I just want you to know that the one who knows is saying that and letting you know that's right. That's not something you need to fight. You don't need to try to stay up here with what is being said from a personality or a voice. It's more important to allow yourself to flow in with that movement that's inside, to allow that presence to be more awake for you. And there is a consciousness that's guiding you and supporting you in that. Now we term that, in particular, the traveler. The term is not important. That the presence is there and that you know it, that's what's important. And how you term it, you can decide for yourself. It's a vocabulary term. If we change the language, it becomes another term. So it's just as important as changing the language. That means it's not that important. What's important is the reality of it. And do you have an openness to that consciousness? Well, if it is the consciousness that's you, there's not a question there really. But because our consciousness is limited, then when we go to expand and increase our awareness of who we are, there's a part of us that has resistance. And that part is the small part of us. Have you ever noticed that when you change circumstances, and as those circumstances become familiar and comfortable to you, that you don't want to change? That there's a resistance to start new, to become uncomfortable in the way of doing something new and different, getting up and going. The circumstances in this world often lull us into being comfortable because we become familiar with them. If you look back on yourself, I'm sure you're going to see that your life has been mysterious at various points and challenging in the way that it's mysterious. That means you didn't know what was going on, or you didn't understand what was going on. You searched for your meaning, for your purpose, to find your place. And maybe as life goes along, you start having a sense of, I think I'm starting to work it out and getting myself together here, finding my place, getting comfortable. I have a comfortable living. And one of the aspects of the Spirit is it does disturb those who are comfortable. Maybe you remember that part of what Jesus said. That he didn't come to work with those who are comfortable, but to disturb the comfortable, to wake them up, to move them along, to work with those who were in the dark. And perhaps those who were most in the dark were those who were willing to accept it, to attach themselves to that kind of an existence, to not realize or to deny a greater existence. So if you come to the movement of spiritual inner awareness looking for comfort, I don't think it's going to last too long. I think you're going to find that when we move, it's about change. It's about shifting. As we move into who we are going to confront our limitations. We are going to confront what is unknown and what is dark to us. I'm certain there's not one of you sitting there that is not having some experience with your darkness, with what's unknown to you. And typically, when people confront what's unknown and what's dark, there's a certain amount of fear. There's a reticence. There's an unwillingness to go forward. When we work and move through the Spirit, we ask for the light. Plain and simple. And we ask for the light that is the highest good of all concern. That light works through the Holy Spirit. I don't mean that as a term that's been, the word canonized is coming forward for some odd reason. Don't know why, but I'll just go ahead and say it. Certainly, in some way, put into a particular vernacular, given a definition, perhaps by one religious order over another religious order. But when I talk about the Holy Spirit, I'm really talking about the Spirit that's whole and complete, also the one that is referred to by the Christ, that Holy Spirit. And what do I mean by the Christ? The consciousness that is anointed. And what is the consciousness that is anointed? It is the consciousness that is charged in the Spirit. Which charge and which Spirit? The one that's delivered of God. And that presence comes forward invisible, inaudible, unknown. So if you're embarking upon the movement of spiritual inner awareness, you're deciding to go into what is invisible, inaudible, and unknown. Undoubtedly, you're also deciding to take on your fears, to confront them. What are they? They're just representations of things that are not real. What does that mean? There really is nothing to fear. Out of God comes all things. I probably heard that within the first few weeks of studying in the movement of spiritual inner awareness. Out of God comes all things. And God loves all of its creation. So that can be translated as everything is of God and it is loved. I've heard it said, God made no junk. In the perfection of God, there's no mistakes. So then what is the disturbance about? It's because we don't know. When Jesus was on the cross, he made this statement, something like, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." He was looking and seeing that whoever was doing what they were doing as unjust, unnecessary, uncalled for, evil, wrong, whatever label we want to put on it, that they didn't know what they were doing or they wouldn't have done it. when we know what we're doing, we choose the best. One way to look at that is that you and everyone else is always doing the best they can. What's the consideration? What they're working with, what you know, what you're conscious of, what the circumstances are in your life. That you can trust that. Sure, there's a protest. It says, but I've often had experiences when I was aware of a better choice and I know I didn't make it. Well, what was it about you such that you wouldn't make the better choice? If you really knew the better choice and knew it as the better choice, you will make it. It's when you don't know that you don't make it. When you realize that you're not making the better choices, it's an opportunity to learn. If you're in the movement of spiritual inner awareness on a direct line, you're learning. You're growing. How much? As much as you can. What is that attitude when we're learning and growing? It's acceptance. It is allowing for everything of God and loved by God to also be given that in return. So there we are, back to loving. One way you can come into a oneness with God, if your intention is to know God, to be face to face, it would be to take on God's creation as your creation. That's the challenge of the movement of spiritual inner awareness, is to look upon their creation and to accept it as your own. That's difficult. Because it's real easy to look at it and say, well, so-and-so did that, or they did that, or I had nothing to do with that, that's not mine. And of course, it's easy to find the evidence and say, oh, that's true. You didn't do that. Or wasn't your hand. Or you weren't involved. But what if I were to tell you, if you're on the planet, you're involved in creating what's on the planet? You can't escape it. You're part of what's present here. And you're part of the creation of it. You might say, well, how can I make things better? It's a great question. Are you willing to take responsibility for that question of how you can make it better? One of the more popular singers at this point had a song about start with the one in the mirror. If you're really going to make it better, then start with yourself. So we say that as take care of yourself. And to take care of yourself, it's to put yourself in alignment with who you are. And who you are is a spiritual being. And there is one who is also who you are, that is of a greater consciousness. Now imagine, if you will, that you had a companion, a friend, who was always available to you, who always knew the answers, understood, always loved you, accepted you, laughed at your jokes, comforted you, told you what you needed to hear even if you didn't want to hear it. That's a friend. Moves past your objections, really loves you in the way that really loves you. That presence is the Spirit. That there is a constant companion. We refer to that one as the Lord. Is it really about gender? No. It's about a presence that's with you, that's available to you. And that's part of learning and becoming involved in the movement of spiritual inner awareness is to take on that relationship with the Lord, with that presence. Who is it? I'd say it's best that you discover that for yourself. If you know the answer, I don't need to hear it. And if you don't know the answer, I don't need to hear that either. It's just important that if you have the inclination toward the Spirit, that you also have the willingness to take on all the aspects of what it is. Now, maybe I've been interesting, and maybe I've just been a total bore here. At least, I guess, you got to hear about my golf game. Or some of it, anyway. I'm just going to tell you what I'm experiencing about who you are right now. You are beloved of God, holy of holies, that which you seek, that which you have longed for. The presence of your soul is here. There's nothing missing. I'm just listening and being aware of what I'm experiencing, you listening and being aware. Generally, we bring a seminar to a close with the words Bre Rush Be Shan. And they're probably Sanskrit. I say probably because I'm sure they're other origin. Regardless, the meaning is the blessings already are. And that meaning is a realization that what's inside, everything we want, everything we hope for and pray for, is already present. What remains is our openness and willingness to realize it. If I had a magic wand that I could make something so, it would be to wave that wand over all of us here and everyone on the planet and every level of God, that we all realize ourselves as divine. Bre Rush Be Shan.